Good morning.
So you all are live.
All right. Good morning. Call the Audit Committee to order for Monday, March 21st, 2022. We have a quorum. Let's see. Are we missing anyone? I don't think we are at this point, except for the finance director. So all members are present and accounted for. So the first order of business is for a motion to approve the agenda for the meeting.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is approval of two sets of minutes, one for January 18th and one for February 22nd. Are there any amendments or questions about the minutes as presented? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes for the agenda for those two meetings?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Now we have reports from subcommittees, but they're the finance director. Jim, I understand from you that you reviewed the annual audit RFP and found it to be fine. I had an email from Jody saying that she was going to move forward with it unless I had a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with it, so I think that should be underway for the next audit.
Mr. Chair, brief point of order. The February 22 minutes
Yes.
need to be approved.
Pardon me?
The February 22 minutes.
I
We
had
did January 18.
I had moved both. I had offered both of those for
Oh, I
comments and then
apologize. I
approval.
thought we were doing one at a time.
We can if you wish.
It's not necessary.
All
No, I
right.
was just checking off my list. Sorry.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Yes, in response, yes, I did review the RFP prior to it being circulated, prior to it hitting the proposal portal.
All right. While we're waiting for the finance director, let's move to old business. And the first order of business on old business is performance measures. We were talking at the last meeting about looking at a comparison of the original performance measures versus the new performance measures after input from our contractor. And we all expressed a desire to see a side-by-side comparison of the old and new performance measures. I believe it was Director Dickinson went to, or someone went to the contractor, and they came back with a proposal that would be $650, which I felt was quite a reasonable price, and said, please, let's get it. I don't know, David, maybe you know where that is after that stage.
Yeah, that was provided last week to all the members. So we got the email from Lee Crumbaugh, who's the Forest Consulting representative, on the 9th, and then Director Dickinson sent it out to everybody on the 17th of last week.
Clearly, I missed that. So let us proceed then. See if I can pull that up on my other computer. But are there comments from the committee?
I do have a question, just as, I guess, for my own education. What are the action steps that are taken if some of these performance measures are not consistently met?
Not
Consistently met.
that would be a question for the city manager.
Yeah, so we try to determine what the source of the issue is. I mean, if we think it's achievable and it's not being met, then is it a resource issue? Or is there some other issue? So, you try and do a root cause analysis to figure out what the problem is, why it's not being met, and address those. In a lot of cases, it's resources aren't available to do that. But yeah, that's what we would do, is try to figure out what's going on and how to fix it, and then resolve it that way.
Thank you.
Yes, Alderwoman Tierney.
Yes, are we prepared to speak to those today? Is that the objective?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just wanted to make sure where we're at here. We received them under two separate subject headers, Alderman Arnett. We received them as the Audit Committee, and we received them as alderpersons, I believe. They were sent out Thursday, Mr. Darrell?
Yeah, so the updated performance measures were also provided. So there's two separate things that were provided last week. One was the updated performance measures with the first and quarter results. And the other thing was the email from Lee Crumbaugh with the comparison of the FY22 with the FY23 performance measures.
And I'm trying to get that to come up on my screen. Clearly, I have not seen that, so I have no comments at this point. Do other members of the committee have any comments? Come on.
Mr.
Rhonda,
Chair, I have a
yes.
comment. Thank
Yes.
you. Mr. Gerald, based on your response, being possibly a lack of resources, how do we juxtapose that with our budget?
Those would normally be, well, one of two ways. If it's already an existing budget item and it's not sufficiently funded, then they would request for additional funding. Or if it's something that needs to be funded for the first time, it would be an enhancement. So those are the options that the departments have. If it's something during the year that's clearly not being adequately funded and it needs to be, then we would work with Director Dickinson to try and identify a funding source to add money to that budget.
Okay, thank you.
So Alderman Arnett, I just sent you the email, the Lee Crumbaugh. It looked like you weren't on that, so you didn't miss it. You just didn't get it. So now you should have it.
All right. Well, I was trying to wonder what was going on. I know I've been busy, but I didn't think I was that busy to miss that. Thank you, Director or City Manager Gerald. So I at this point, yes, Jim.
Yeah, thank you for providing the status as of March. I think if someone were to provide an overall assessment of it, they would. I think the word lacking would kind of come to mind in general. Is who in the city government is in terms of the staff is responsible for the management of the department heads and the monitoring of these? I understand that there was at one time a position that has not been filled, but in that time, who is now responsible for working with the department heads to ensure that these are monitored and also tracked and we get kind of a more thorough response?
Jim, that would be me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And City Manager, do you have anything else going on right now?
We hope to get somebody in that position relatively soon. So I mean, that's a great responsibility for that position. Unfortunately, I don't have sufficient time to spend on it, and that's an unfortunate thing. But as soon as we get that position filled, they will be assigned that responsibility again.
Thank you. I remember in our discussions with Forest Consulting, one of the concerns I had was that the monitoring and maintenance would not be the responsibility of Forest. They were just part of the implementation team, and we had dedicated staff to do that monitoring and maintenance. And I hope we can get back to that.
We will.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney, yes, please.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I wasn't involved in the initial discussions with Forrest. I noticed that some of the responses, results, I guess you should say, are measured by numbers, and then some of the results are descriptive, more descriptive. Some of the number ones, such as the law office, are really great. Some of the descriptive ones, they'll, like the harbor master, they're very descriptive. And then some just say a status, like not yet, or not yet. And I think I'm prepared to just speak of one in particular that kind of stuck out like a sore thumb, and I hate to put it that way, and I'm sure there's a reason for it if we're prepared to discuss that. Do my colleagues, are we there?
Yes, please.
Oh,
Go ahead.
it was the tab, and again, I'm sure there's a reason, resiliency and sustainability. I don't know if the measures were just not, realistic. And there were majority of them were not yet, and it just surprised me a little bit. I don't know if anyone else noticed that or cared to speak to it, or if the city manager.
Yeah, I think, and you'll notice on the list in the email from Mr. Crumball that was one of the groups that redid their performance measures, because a lot of them, what I found from the resilience and sustainability, that was almost like a to-do list instead of performance measures.
Right.
And that's why
Exactly.
a lot of them were, it's not done yet, because it's just a thing that needs to be done, and it's done. And then you move on to other things, like doing I don't know, like issuing a policy statement. Well, that's not a performance measure. That's a to-do item, right? So while we're still doing the FY22s, those do kind of stick out because they're not really good performance measures.
Okay, so that circles back to my initial question. Would then the Office of Law with more, numbers, like, how many were done, 100%, like that is more what we're looking for?
Yes, that's right. And hopefully they're more outcome than output, because sometimes numbers are just output and they don't really tell you a lot, like potholes filled. Well, it sounds great to do 800 potholes, but what does that really tell you about the condition of the road? It maybe tell you the condition of the road is really bad, even though that number is high. So again, as much as possible, I know that Lee, when he was working with the departments, was trying to get to outcome based. So the condition of the road, not just the number of potholes filled, for example.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, because those sort of just trigger out like a so what response, yay, you did that, but what, in what context? So I guess for guidance, Mr. City Manager, is there one in particular that we could use as sort of an A versus, that we could score as what we're looking for? I mean, I look at the Harbor Master one, and that's totally descriptive. We did this, and this is what we did, and da-da-da. I look at the law office, and it's more percentages. And again, maybe it's because it's the transition.
Right. Typically, fire is they're usually an A student in most things. and so they may be a good one to look at. I think Public Works was on the right track, and I think they worked a lot with Lee and didn't appreciably change their performance measures. So I think theirs is pretty good too. I know Sapphire was one that did update theirs, but they go through that process every year to review and update their performance measures as needed. So I think probably those two departments are pretty good.
So years ago, we had initiated a performance budgeting system. And the ultimate goal was to get to outcomes that were comparable metrics so that you could look at a unit of fire versus a unit of parks and recs. And clearly there were some management issues, but also budget issues. And that was the hope that we would be able to say for the next available dollar to spend, where do we get the biggest bang for the buck? That was a complicated system, and very few of the departments were able to give us output measures, and it got jettisoned, I believe, when Mayor Panelides came on board. I can't quite recall that history, but there are two primary reasons, it seems to me, for having these performance measures. One is look at the performance of each of the components, but the other one is to help, and it is the backbone of the budget system. And soon we'll start to be hearing from each of the departments, and they'll be telling us how they met these measures. And quite frankly, I think they're still all over the map. I don't think anybody would argue at this point that we have very good comparative measures across departments, or even comparability in the way the departments are measuring. Now, I don't know, I would turn to the auditors on the committee. Maybe you never can get that kind of comparability, but it seems to me that that is the ultimate goal, has been for a long time in the city, that we be able to look across departments to be able to make sound budget decisions. When we get to the nth dollar, where do we get the most bang for our buck? And I don't even feel personally that in many of the departments we have performance measures yet, let alone comparability. So I consider this to be very much still a work in progress. And when we get later on in this discussion, I think I'd like to ask whether we need another round of help from outside people. But I'm assuming, City Manager Gerald, we want to wait until we have an assistant city manager before we embark on that.
Well, I think the other thing is, again, I sent out the FY22 because that's what we're using right now, and that's what we're measuring. I think I would recommend that focus on the FY23, because that's the work product that Lee Crumbaugh got us to. So I think that would be better to focus on that and see if they were able to help us accomplish those goals that you were describing, or not. I mean, they're certainly still available, and you see that they're pretty reasonably priced if we need further help. But that was what they did. They worked closely with each department to try to come up with a good performance measurement system. And it's hard because the departments do such different things from each other to ever have that direct ability to compare them for that last dollar of where you would place it. So
I'll turn to Alderwoman Pendle Charles next, but I do want to come back to this point, and I do want to talk to our non-aldermatic members, because when you look at our charter in the city code, it literally in the charter, performance measure is high on the list of responsibilities for this committee. And I feel personally that we have a ways to go. And we may never, as you say, City Manager Gerald, get to absolute comparability, but I'd like to at least get to what I feel are output measures. And I don't think we're there. But Alderwoman Pendle Charles, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to piggyback on something Mr. Gerald said as far as the departments really wide-ranging responsibilities that they have among their departments. I would suspect, and I could be quite wrong and way out on the limb on this, especially when it comes to possibly our fire department, they have a lot of mandates that they have to adhere to when it comes to federal, state, local, including being a class 1, and probably, I'm guessing their brain is probably trained and geared toward that. So for them to develop their performance measures, it's almost second nature for them. That's something they're already kind of sort of doing. And I see Mr. Cardillo shaking his head. With other departments, it's much more programmatic, and it's probably a little more difficult. With fire department, they're already there because that's what they have to do anyhow. So am I on the right train, Mr. Cardillo?
So can we explore that just a little bit more? Because I think you're right. Public safety, clearly they have metrics. They have metrics they need to meet. Police has to file their what is their accountability report that they do each year, and fire in order to maintain their #1 status. But I would think that Public Works is also got very countable kinds of outputs. Actually, I'm trying to figure out what are the divisions or organizations that we don't think have output measures. Our office of the new office, blanking on the
Community services,
community
Office of Community
services.
Service.
I would think they can also have counts, number of organizations that they've coordinated with, number of persons they've given help, number of hours they've spent in the resource centers. I think those are pretty countable, and that's closer to, I'm still not sure that's an outcome measure. An outcome measure would be lives changed, lives put on a better course, food in mouths, or getting people connected with school credits, getting housing, things like that. And it seems to me that's the ultimate goal of everything we're doing in this city, is to provide services to our constituency and our businesses and our visitors. And so it seems to me that that is a common thread. How did you serve those 3 cohorts? And each one will have a different focus on the cohort that they are serving, and a different way to serve them. But the ultimate outcome is, we met several visiting voters and got X number of pump outs, and we got some kudos. I know that some people have told me what a good job the deputy harbor master is doing and how user friendly he is and those sorts of things. So, but I'm talking on too long. Let's go to people with some expertise like Jim and Caroline and Katie. Rhonda, you wanted to follow up?
Yeah, just one thing I want to add. I think we can couch Public Works as kind of be a cheater. They've got Mr. Gerald, who used to be the director. So, that's probably very helpful that they.
I don't have a bias there. What do you mean?
If it's a good outcome, it's not counted as cheating.
Can I ask a
Counted
question?
on the right path.
It's engineering versus liberal arts. Yep.
Let's turn to Jim and Caroline. And
Thank you for indulging me.
Thanks, Rhonda. A question: when we see this, this is broadly, we have these measures. These measures are determined by the department head in advance. There's a dialogue or an exchange between the department head and city management when these are finalized. And at what point, let me ask Mr. Gerald, what do you do with these on a periodic basis when you receive them?
Well, number one, I look through them to make sure they're complete and
Okay.
follow up if they're not complete.
Okay.
But then look at the numbers to see if roughly they're on track or where we need, so let's go back to resilience and sustainability. So that's basically a two-person organization that has way more to do than what they can do. Okay. So, I am generally already know the areas that they're not able to get to just because they don't have the bandwidth right now to get to them. So then we talk about what the priorities are and how we can get some of the other things done. And so for that particular organization in the budget, we're asking for another employee, a contract employee to try to help with that situation. So that's probably a good example of, they're not able to meet all of the things that we would like for that organization to do. That's a fairly new organization. So we need to address that through the budget.
Okay, so what I was thinking was similar to how department heads receive their quarterly financials that tracks their actuals against their budget. That is then monitored with you and with the finance committee. So I guess what I'm thinking is, could we then mirror that process that's in place now for the performance measures for the audit committee to monitor the department heads, just kind of along the same lines that the finance committee would do with the monthly or the quarterly budget reporting? Would that be how you? Because this is all this is new for everybody.
And you remember, Jim, at one time we were talking about having each department come periodically to the audit committee to make a presentation on their performance measures and how they're doing and where they feel like they need help, and have a discussion for each department. And I think we even started that with a couple of the departments or a few of the departments. Yeah. And if that would be helpful, we could certainly do that as well. But yeah, I'm sure we could do that.
Well, I think what I'm looking for is in the audit committee's oversight role, what is our role in this? Is it to monitor how these departments are being evaluated based on the results, rather than I don't want a department head reporting to the audit committee on a quarterly basis. I don't think that would be productive for anybody. But just in general, if we can see a process where the quarterly performance measures are monitored and managed, and there's a dialogue internally that us as the audit committee would say, okay, we're on the right track, much like the finance committee would do on the financial performance against budget. Is that how we want to act as a committee on the oversight of performance measures? And I'll ask either Mr. Gerald or Alderman Arnett, Mr. Chair. Is that accurate? Because
I think that it's very accurate, and it's going to dovetail with another item when we get down to discussing the nature of the audit committee. One of the things that I think is missing and could be a great guidance to the performance measures is having a strategic plan. Because you would think that you would compare your performance to how it moved you towards achieving the strategic plan for the city. And that's something that I think has languished. And I'm not going to be critical, because I think that everybody is drinking out of a fire hose, but I think the city council doesn't really have a formalized shared vision, and I don't think the city itself has a formalized shared vision. And to me, the strategic plan, and the one done in 2012, I think was pretty darn good, and it fell by the wayside because of changes in administrations. So we need to think about how we can make those carry forward and not depend upon the personal druthers and personalities of elected officials, but getting outcome looking performance measures linked up to an overall strategic plan that was developed, and it was then Director Gerald, who was one of the people that was involved in that, and it was really led by all of the department heads which at the time I was thinking, gee, where's the council? But really they're the people who conduct the business of the city, and they are the ones that really ought to have, in a way, a shared vision across the departments. And then you link up your performance measures to how you're moving along to achieving your strategic plan. So I see them personally, and we'll let Caroline and Katie speak, but I see those two things as essential, and they need to dovetail. And it seems like you're wandering in the dark if you do one and not the other. So, but let me give Caroline and Katie, well, Director Gerald, I think you wanted to speak directly to that.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that the guy that led that back in 2012 is back with the city, Mike Malinoff, and certainly would be a great assistance in that process. And I think we could use our same consultant who's now very familiar with each of the departments, very familiar with the performance measures as they have been set up to help us with that strategic plan. And we could use that 2012 as sort of the jumping off point to update it and to develop it. But yeah, I mean, if you look at all of the goals that each of the departments has on the left-hand side of those should all be directly tied to the strategic plan.
Right.
Those should fall from the strategic plan for each of the departments. So it's really important.
And again, the other part of that strategic plan was a citizen survey. And that was one of the things last year was a call for the budget was money set aside to do a citizen survey. And they had quite an elaborate citizen survey process established and a dashboard. And the dashboard was meant so that citizens could go to the city website and follow along the progress that we were making towards meeting our strategic plan, but also provide input. And the input could be, hey, our street has been unpaved for 6 months, or it could be, hey, we just got something new, a new park bench at the end of our street, and thank you very much for that. But so I think that there's, formulating in my mind, 3 components: the outcome-based performance measures linked to a strategic plan, and then a process where we can get input back from the very people that we are here to serve. And so I think it makes a good sense, but I'm going to stop talking because I'm talking too much and not listening to people who have expertise. So Caroline or Katie, either one of you want to jump in on this?
I'm happy to.
Caroline, want to go?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. You know, I don't want to repeat everything that Jim said, but I'm in 100%. He raised a lot of the questions that I had as a relatively new person on the committee. How does this all get processed? And I do think it's our role as a audit committee to provide oversight, but not minutia management of the process. And so trying to make sure that we look at things from that maybe 10,000 foot level to make sure that things look appropriate without trying to micromanage the city manager is very important to me. But I do think it would be beneficial to periodically have one of these several departments present to us so that we could dig in a little bit and ask some of the questions that we have so that we can understand better the processes that go on in those departments. But overall, I wholeheartedly agree with what the issues were that Jim brought up. And for you, Alderman Arnett, I totally agree with you in terms of trying to link this to a revised strategic plan. I think it just keeps everything fresh. It keeps everyone thinking and keeps everything moving forward.
Katie, are you comfortable in giving us a response?
Yeah, certainly. Well, certainly the strategic plan is absolutely key, and I'm hoping that we get that done. I'm not convinced that a survey needs to happen. It sounds like a whole lot of money for information that older people should have anyway from their constituents. So I would, in my opinion, I think there are better uses of that money than a survey, but that's just my opinion. And to Caroline's thoughts about micromanaging, I absolutely endorse her belief in that. Once Mr. Gerald has a person in place whose job it is to collect and monitor the performance measures, I'm not sure we need to be doing that job. I think that's a city administration job. I do think, however, that we should be looking at departments that are not reporting timely. I think we should look at departments that are underachieving against their own goals. And I guess just a philosophical question, I'm not sure why we have goals set in a department if we already know there's not people on board to get that work done. So it seems like it's not very helpful to say, haven't done it, haven't started, whatever. My question is, why do we even have that measure? But that's for another conversation. I'm not I'm not convinced either that having departments come in and talk about their performance measures is optimal use of our time. We only have an hour and a half every month. That's very little time. And I think, again, if we have someone on city staff whose job it is to monitor the reporting and the achievement of performance measures, and then they report to us periodically, maybe they report quarterly on what they have learned from their monitoring and following their departments, might be a better use of that time.
So I think you're absolutely right. We sort of have a meta function. We should be monitoring the monitoring, not evaluating the monitoring per se.
Correct.
Jim, you're shaking your head. You're on mute.
Nodding. Yes, nodding.
Right.
Not disagreeing. Yes, I'm in agreement with your assessment as to the role of the AC on the performance measures. Yes.
So I guess for the record, I would like to say that I would like to be reflected in the minute that we still we would call the performance measure system still a work in progress, and that we think that it needs to be made more robust. I think that we also are saying as a committee, for the record, that we would like to see a strategic plan that the performance measures can link to. I'll get back. I see several hands, so I'll get back to Ms. George's comment on the survey. But I think Rhonda had her hand up, then David, then Ellie. Rhonda, please.
Ellie had her hand up a while ago, so.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Alderwoman Tierney had her hand up a while ago, so.
Oh, I think we're really fickle as a council. I'm looking, if I was a department, I would be very confused in our code. I'm a code person, and I'm looking at our code and I'm like, who was here? What were we thinking? This was October 12th, 2020, where we did an ordinance. I'm trying to look it up, 037-20, where we said, okay, we're going to do performance statements. And there's no tie-in to a strategic plan. And I would recommend that we might need to revise this, because I know we asked the departments to look at this code section. I don't mean to make things more confusing, but it's confusing to me. I know you don't have it in front of you, but it just, it says each agency and department for itself and its activities and programs shall file an annual statement of performance standards with the city clerk by January 15th. Each statement shall address the following requirements, and goes further, the city council shall conduct a public hearing with regard to each performance statement. The city council shall review and evaluate each statement, making revisions as are deemed advisable. The city council shall adopt a resolution no later than March 1, approving the performance statements as submitted. So what What is that talking about?
So if I may, that was an add-on. It was an amendment to the original statement in the charter about the purpose of the audit committee. And I wasn't on the audit committee, but my sense of that when we had it before us in the council was that the audit committee was looking for what auditors and therefore audit committees ought to be doing, and performance measures was left out. I think Alderwoman Tierney, you're quite correct. It also left out strategic plan, but I think that's part of our old business topic B, the nature of the audit committee. I think we need to go back and really rethink what it is that is our value added. I'm not interested in a committee, and that's my personal view, that is a make work committee and just adds to the burdens. As a longtime federal manager at various levels, I dreaded seeing these kinds of performance measures coming along. But I also realized that if you did a good job on them, like say our public works department, it makes a difference when you go in and ask for more staff, or you go in and ask for more budget dollars or a new initiative. So I learned that it was smart to take this seriously. Not every component that I was in competition with in the federal government did learn that lesson. And I'd like to create a culture where performance measures and strategic plans truly do make a difference. There is some value added to the departments to say, if I really do a good job here and impress, that is going to pay off down the road when I really need something. And that's the kind of culture I think we want. But I don't think we want, oh God, let's find somebody to fill out this stuff and get it off our desk and up to the city manager, the assistant city manager, and just throw in everything. That is not productive. And I don't think that to the extent the finance committee or the audit committee encourages that kind of thing, we're being value added ourselves. And by the way, there is that duality between us and the finance committee, where the finance committee does hear from the departments and it's largely guided by their performance measures. And I think in response to Ms. George, that is where those discussions should go on. We shouldn't be having hearings where they say exactly the same thing to us that they're saying to the finance committee. As I said, we're a meta function. We evaluate the evaluations. We look at the performance measure, the performance of the performance measures. Anyway, enough of.
Well, I just want to, say that I think is the end game here, is to marry up the performance and relate it to the budget as far as, efficiency and where they may need resources or transfer of resources. But I don't know how we're going to get the reporting is out of line. I mean, we're going to be reviewing fiscal year 2023, and we're not quite. We knew we weren't going to be there this budget review, but ultimately we would want them to be a parallel review. I just got hung up on the code asking for performance statements when we're reviewing performance measures. If I'm confused, I'm sure the departments might be confused. I don't know.
No, they learned how to tolerate us.
Thank you.
But no, I think those are good comments, Alderwoman Tierney. Alderwoman Pendle Charles.
Let Mr. Gerald go next. I'm sure he's something very salient to say.
Well, I thought we were getting ready to wrap it up, so I was just going to say something to wrap it up. So maybe you should go first.
Okay, and Ms. George and Chairman, you must have been reading my mind. I wrote down view budget committee hearings because that's really where you get the meat and potatoes. And if there's any homework, I guess, for us as an audit committee, should be to view those budget hearings by each department. They're very intensive and enlightening. So that's where the time should be. The other thing is, and I know that our department leadership, they were trained on how to write their performance measures. And I'm kind of a checklist kind of person. Maybe, and I don't know, maybe this has already been done. If there's a checklist that kind of guides the department into how their performance measures should be written, maybe that would be helpful. And it might be slightly different depending on the department itself. I don't know. But if that can be a guide and at some point, even kind of weaning them off the checklist once we kind of get them on there, that might be, I don't know, Mr. Gerald, is that something that's possible to kind of those departments that aren't quite there with their performance measures are kind of checklists, or is that already there and in place? I don't know.
That was part of the duties or the responsibilities of Forest Consulting. Was they provided training first. They sat down with the department leadership for each department and provided training on performance measures, how to properly write the measures, what type of measures they should be, to sort of, as much as possible, to develop outcome-based. But outcome-based, and I'd be interested to hear Katie talk about this, but outcome-based are hard measures to measure. I mean, if you think about the street example that I use, we only do a street condition assessment every 4 years. So you're only updating that measure every 4 years, where potholes are easy, that, you measure the number that you go out and fill. And so either input or output measures are pretty easy to measure, outcome-based or not. And the example that Alderman Arnett used about community services, where you can measure the number of people served and the number of meals served and all those, but are you truly measuring the performance of making sure that people have enough to eat in the city and that their issues are being addressed, which are really outcome-based. So I was just going to suggest, maybe to wrap this up, that the recommendation, I think, should be that we hire Forrest again to start working on the strategic plan. And then after they finish that we go over the performance measures one more time to make sure that all of the goals, the departmental goals, are directly linked to the strategic plan, because that will form that nexus and that direct tie between the two documents, the strategic plan and the performance measures.
And Mr. Chair, to follow on to city manager's comments, we have an awful lot of performance measures. Like if you look at the entire list for the entire city, I don't know what the number is. Mr. Gerald, do you have that number off the top of your head?
No, but it's way too many.
It's way too many. And one thing, there's sort of a magic number of 100, and I'm sure we're far beyond 100. And one approach to kind of paring that down is to have measures that are useful for the department. So those are internal measures that they can use to evaluate performance amongst their own staff. And then there are the other measures, the externally reported ones. Those are the ones we want to see. Those are the ones that would actually tie to the strategic plan. So perhaps that's something we could chat with Forrest about and say, when we do that final look, that we could kind of cull through what we have and come up with the reports, the measures, hopefully mostly outcome measures, that would be the actual things that tie to the strategic plan.
Ross, you're on mute.
Who did that? I couldn't agree with your comments more, Ms. George, and I think that we're really kind of resolving where we need to go. The internal measures should be internal and they're not our business really. They might be of interest to the city manager or the department heads, but they're not. And I think that the more we can move to outcome, the more we can get to lives changed for the better, whether it's a businessman or who got a permit through more quickly, or it's a constituent that got access to monies for an educational program or assistance for rent, those sorts of things. But I do think there's another meta-analysis that the city manager brought up. The number of potholes. First of all, it does seem to me it would be interesting to know if potholes vary over time, or are they the same number every year over and over again? If they vary, is that because of weather conditions? But if they're the same numbers over and over again, is that an acceptable level of reoccurrence? Is there something that is fundamentally wrong with our road structure that we continue to get 800 potholes a year that need repair? And I don't know the answer. I'm not even looking for the answer, but I think that again is some analysis of the analysis, or meta-analysis, if you will. Why do we have so many potholes? And maybe there's a capital investment that we need to make. I think there's some new surface kinds of things that you could put down rather than just doing tar patching that you can suggest that the departments move to. But I want to take up what the city manager. I'd like to hear a motion that we hire. I'm not sure we can direct it to Forrest again. We'll have to talk to procurement about that. But we hire someone to work on resuscitating and developing a new strategic plan. And as a part of that work, that we relate the performance measures to the strategic plan goals that are developed under that process. Alderwoman Tierney.
Before I attempt to make a motion, wasn't there a discussion that we were going to use, we could use some of our funds for that effort, if I recollect?
Yeah.
And if it's under a certain value, do we need to do an RFP? Can't we just assign it to Forrest, city manager?
Or Director Dickinson.
Like Director Dickinson was primed and ready to answer.
Oh, she's
that.
here. Okay, sorry, I didn't see her. Hi, Director Dickinson.
So
yeah, go ahead.
I would have to talk to Brian Snyder first, but it seems as though Forrest would have already done some of the legwork to help out with the strategic plan, because they help so much with the performance measures. So that may be a cost savings for us to continue with them for the strategic plan.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that
But
would be.
there are many firms out there that can do strategic plans, but that the rates are favorable, and them having them already familiar with their performance measures would probably help us financially as well.
Do they have a contract that we could just amend, or did we just?
Yes, and I don't know what the scope of services was, but this is very related to the scope of services. I believe that the performance measures would be. And if you're asking about the funding, there's likely some funding left from this year from your $25,000 that the audit committee has, and there'll be funding in next year's budget as well.
Okay.
But before we go in that direction, I wasn't, and I don't think Alderwoman Tierney was either. Are we happy with the performance of Forrest? I mean, I don't know, but it does seem to me that we still have some less than stellar performance measures by department. Is that a reflection of the department or a reflection of the contractor?
So in my case, you saw the email that came through where Mr. Crumbaugh said some of the departments had not yet revised their performance measures to the new guidance. And finance is one of them. And with our issue, it's just bandwidth, having time to get to them, to revise them completely and rewrite them. So, so I would say that the ones that aren't, I thought they did a very good job. I was very impressed with their training and their definition of what was wrong with them. It's just when you have a service or a service department, like finance, that doesn't work with the community directly, it's kind of more difficult to formulate them, I think. So
I think
anyways, I just say it's mostly on us, and their guidance was very helpful and very useful. It's just a matter of bandwidth from our perspective.
And it would be expedient. And by the way, I think Director Dickinson, before I get back to you, Alderwoman Tierney, there are internal and external services. Both of them are valuable, but I'm assuming we need to make that distinction when we look at both the strategic plan and the performance measures. Alderman Tierney, you wanted to follow on before
Yeah,
I get to
I was
Alderman?
going to try to fumble through a motion if that's okay.
Let me check with Mr. Cardillo and Alderwoman
Okay,
Kendall Charles.
that's
I would
fine.
like a motion, but Rhonda, did you have something you wanted to add to this before we do a motion?
Yeah, I just want to kind of get some feedback from Director Gerald and Ms. Dickinson regarding the motion. Is that the proper channel or mechanism to use to get this done?
Well, we don't have a motion yet.
No, I mean, you had kind of outlined the motion, Mr. Chair.
I know. Mr.
I would say
Cardillo,
yes.
Rhonda, can we hold that question for a second? Let me get to Mr.
Okay,
Cardillo
sure.
and Ms. Ewing.
Just
Sure.
a question before we go the route of re-engaging Forest. When I look at the Department of Human Resources, and I look at I go to the goals of the Department of Human Resources, the last goal talks about, let's see, ensure city workforce is well-trained in best practices and latest technology. What I'm asking is this something that can be, is the monitoring of performance measures something that can be temporarily absorbed by the Department of Human Resources? And can they work with Forest in the absence of the unfilled position right now? Can that be absorbed by, can that collaboration with Forest be absorbed by the Department of Human Resources? There's my question.
That would be a question for the city manager.
I would say no. I would not recommend or support that. They are at full plates too. This really should be with the assistant city manager, and we're going to have hopefully somebody in there starting in May. So,
I was like temporarily. Is that something within the purview of human resources to properly train managers on this task? No. Okay.
I would prefer that reside with the assistant city manager. I think that's the appropriate place.
Although, Jim, I do
Understood.
think you raise a very interesting point. It would seem like, and I think very highly, we have a very good human resource director that it would be good to invite her to attend these meetings because we want to punish her, but invite her to come and speak to these issues, maybe at the next meeting or the meeting after, as we get more fully fleshed out. I'd really like to hear her view of how this has happened in terms of a human resource kind of outcome. But let me go to Ms. Ewing, please.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree. Again, having these presentations, having people come before us, and we're doing the meta-analysis of the meta-analysis, but it gives us the opportunity to learn, grow, and dig into what these different departments are doing, and maybe able to offer suggestions on fresh eyes or new pathways forward for them. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And then my other question was, do we as the audit committee have the authority to request a revised strategic plan for the city of Annapolis? Or is this something that has to go to some other committee, such as, I don't know if it's the city, if it's the city council, or is this something we really can do?
Well, so you raise a good point, and I think Alderwoman Tierney raised it earlier in her observation that the role of the audit committee is kind of confused, and it probably does depend to some degree on who happens to sit on the audit committee. But I do think that we need to think about legislation to put strategic plan in some way as a part of our enabling legislation. I'm really going to, when we get to that section, if we have time, propose that we have a subgroup that really goes back and reviews all of the enabling legislation with the point of thinking about the confusion that Alderwoman Tierney represented, but this omission, which I believe, but frankly, I think that it is within the powers of the city manager to ask that that a new strategic plan be developed, and that ask that the audit committee, until we get a more formalized legislative charge, that the audit committee oversee that. That I will putting words in Mr. Gerald's mouth, but we'll see how the motion comes out. But certainly it is within the powers of the administration to order up a new strategic plan. I think that it is certainly in the interest of the city council to both have a strategic plan and participate. The last time, my problem with the strategic plan was that it came to the council late in the game and was more or less of, here's what we've done, we hope you like it, rather than, what's your input on this? And I think that was a missed opportunity. It didn't really make any difference. We weren't going to vote yes or no on the strategic plan, but I think it would have been good for the council primarily to have had more of an involvement in the strategic plan. So at this point, I would certainly entertain a motion from a member of the audit committee that we consider having the consultant force take up the job of giving us a bid on working on the strategic plan. Is that a fulsome motion, or is there more detail that might be needed? Alderwoman Tierney.
Yeah. How about I'd like to propose a motion that we amend the existing forest contract to develop a strategic plan for the city of Annapolis. The goal would be to utilize the new performance measures that Forest developed as much as possible for a true connection with the strategic plan. Ultimately, these measurements will be reviewed by the audit committee.
Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Rhonda, Alderman Pendle Charles, was this along the lines, you were getting ready to make a motion, is this along the lines of what you were thinking?
That was Alderwoman Tierney is answering my question. Yeah, that sounds more appropriate in my mind, that we stick with what she has outlined right there, verbatim.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there discussion from the floor?
A question for for Alderwoman Tierney. When we say performance measures will be reviewed by the audit committee.
Right, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where
I ended that sort of with a question mark. Could we just talk about that, and I'll amend my motion accordingly? We need to know that the measurements will be reviewed by the audit committee, ... with recommendations.
I think the word review might need to be explained more. What does review mean?
Right.
And what do they do with those? What do they do with that review? I mean, it's a public review.
Right. And
yeah.
what concerns me is it allows the possibility of taking it down to the ground level of a performance measure and determining whether it's an appropriate performance measure. And that's not really an appropriate role for the audit committee.
And that's where it circles back to, I think, what the intention of the code was that the city council reviews. could I put the city manager on the spot and say, how do we make this review viable for you, Mr. City Manager? What are your thoughts? How do I conclude that last sentence?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because that's really sort of a function of the council as a whole. And if the council as a whole has sort of delegated that to the audit committee, because it's not really delegated to anybody else, right? So
Yeah.
that's why we kind of got into this whole performance measurement. What was it, a year ago, Jim, that we started talking about performance measures as a thing that the audit committee may want to look at?
Yeah,
because nobody
I
else
think-
is doing it, and it really needs to be done. So it's just a matter of what level that review is done. Is it at the sort of the highest meta level that Alderman Arnett keeps talking about, or is it delving down into the specific measures themselves instead just the goals and objectives?
And then that, I mean, will it, I'm thinking out loud here, will it involve a meeting between the finance committee and the audit committee to discuss them? I mean, how do we make that connection to the budget?
So if I could throw in, because I don't want to lose thought, Miss George raised a very important point to me, at least, and that is, I think we have way too many measures. And not only that, there seems to be an inverse relationship. The smaller the component, the more measures they have. That doesn't make sense to me. And I think that we really can help the departments by having a more concise set of measures that are really well differentiated. Let's not have overlapping measures, and let's have a reasonable amount of measures. When you look at the reports, and and I have binders full of each of the versions, it's information overload. In fact, it's data overload, and it's not really information. So I think that part of what I hope comes out of this, using the contractor to develop a strategic plan and link it to the performance measures directly, will sort some of that out. We don't know until we get the work done.
Okay, so
But
maybe
we
I
have
can-
an answer. Ms. George?
Perhaps if I'm kind of working with Alderwoman Tierney on this in terms of what words can we use that would make this be okay and close the loop. What if we said would review the reports issued by the city manager's office regarding performance measures? How would City Manager Gerald, how would you feel about that?
If it's done on a semi-annual basis.
Sounds like nobody wants
No,
to.
I think the city council should be doing that. It's just a matter of how the city council wants to delegate that to a committee.
Well, what
because
if
that's a tough thing to do for the council as a whole.
Right. Well,
Have a
what
meeting.
if we took out the words review? How would it read, Alderwoman Tierney, if we didn't have that last little piece on it?
Just scratch the last sentence. At this point, we're doing baby steps here. Let's get the
Right.
performance measures to align, to utilize new performance measures to develop, because we don't want to waste that work. There's been a ton
Right.
of work for, so those new performance measures, let me read it again. The motion is to, I propose an amendment to existing forest contract to develop a strategic plan for the city of Annapolis. Objective would be to utilize the new performance measures developed by Forest as much as possible for a true connection with the strategic plan.
Yeah,
And what if we just stop there?
Stop.
Yeah, but I don't even think, I think the linkage is the important part. So it's linked
Yeah,
the
to-
performance measures to the strategic plan.
Right. Yeah,
And
I say that
if
in the
it's the
last
new
sentence.
ones, it's fine. If it's the old ones, fine. If it's even newer ones, that's fine too. That just, what we're really after, in my view, is the linkage between the strategic plan and the performance measures.
Right. Right. But I would attest that we did hire Forest, we did pay them, they did produce, and we have measurements for fiscal year 2023, or at least we started them, that I don't want to lose that work. So that's,
No, but that's really their job, and they may, in view of thinking about the strategic plan, they may see some refinements to the performance measures. I know they were provided a copy of the strategic plan, but I don't know how much they looked at it or were directed to look at that. So to me, what we're asking them to do is to update the strategic plan and make sure that the performance measures are linked to that plan. Whatever that linkage entails will fall out of the work product.
so when I say in the second sentence, goal would be to utilize performance measures developed by Forest as much
I
as
just
possible.
would say link performance measures to the strategic plan.
Or true connection with the strategic plan.
But
Right.
now, does everyone have a sense of what the motion is?
Yeah.
I don't.
Oh, okay.
Can you
Well,
reread it again, Alderwoman Tierney?
sure, yeah. I motion that we amend the existing forest contract pending procurement approval to develop a strategic plan for the city of Annapolis. And to link
Can I stop you?
existing and new performance measures to this strategic plan.
We have a strategic plan. So I think what we're asking them to do is to update the existing strategic plan and link the performance measures to that strategic plan. I also, just as you don't want to throw away the work on the performance measures, I don't want to throw away the work on the strategic plan, particularly since as I reread it, it still seems pretty timely and cogent. I'd ask Director Gerald City Manager Gerald to comment on that, but going back and looking at that document, it's too bad we lost sight of it because I thought there were a lot of really good things that still obtain today.
I think I think the city manager said that Forest did have that.
Yeah, I know. And so what I'm
Yeah,
saying is
that's
we
good.
want to
Okay.
update it's the strategic plan of 2012. We want a strategic plan of 2023 or whatever we're going to call it. And we want that strategic plan and the performance measures to be integrated.
Okay. So the motion would be to amend the Forest contract to revise the existing City of Annapolis strategic plan and to link performance measures with this revised strategic plan. Period.
Yep.
Is there a second for that motion? Okay, we have a seconded. I would quibble with the word revise. I would prefer update, but I want to move this forward. So let's just, we have a motion. Is everyone ready to vote on that motion?
Yes.
All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion carries unanimously. All right,
Kim, did you get that?
Yeah, right. Kim, if you have any questions, you can either talk to Alderwoman Tierney or me, and we'll make sure that we get that. But I think this is an important step forward, and I want to thank the committee for thinking about this. We are now starting to run into a time constraint. I have one must do on the remainder of the agenda, but we have not heard from the finance director. I guess I would ask you to report things that you think we really know. We don't have to have a fulsome, because I know you're very busy and you're doing a million things: budget, union negotiations, AREP, consortium, and so on. So if you could give us a update that you would like us to have, I'd appreciate that at this point.
Those would be the items that I would tell you are absorbing the time here. As far as my office, as far as my desk is concerned, I've been working with the AMRP meetings, budget, and the union negotiations, all going on at the same time. Definitely filling my calendar.
Well,
Trying
and
to, trying to
try
keep,
fill vacancies.
yeah, I was just, as I'm sitting here looking at see if we have any new applicants here in a couple of our jobs, our accountant job and our procurement officer position, trying to see if we've got anybody to talk to. And those weigh on my mind. And, in addition, not having time to deal with the overall management of the office and my staff when you're so busy with meetings back to back to back to back. So,
And we have the, what is it called now? AFR?
Act for
that
the
ACFR?
annual comprehensive financial report is
ACFR.
out. And when a single audit is done, and which is typically by the end of March, but I think that they're timing it to get it done in April. And we will come to the audit committee and do a presentation with the
Okay.
external firm. And, I think I sent the RFP out to the committee. That was one of my emails.
Yes. Yes, you did.
And I don't know if anybody had any comments on that.
I did
I'll
not,
just-
and I thought you actually went forward with it. Jim reviewed it, and Jim and Katie are probably the two that are most, and Caroline, the three that are most competent to review it. I certainly wouldn't
Yeah.
claim to be.
The only updates now is setting the dates on when everything is due. And Brian is back from vacation, so we should be able to get that out on the street this week.
Okay, so thank you for that update. We know how hard you and your staff are working, and we appreciate it. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think the council set us on the right course with going the 3P route, and I know you're working hard to get the concession agreement finalized and start to see the walls fall on the Hillman garage. So, and I know you and David and others have been spending an enormous amount of time bringing that to us, and we do appreciate that effort. I want to be sure before we go further with the agenda to take a moment to recognize that Ms. George is leaving us. I did not get much of a overlapping time with you, but I have witnessed from afar the audit committee's work, and I have witnessed the zeal and the direction that you've brought to the committee. And I certainly want to express, and I think the committee would express happiness for you going to your new station, but also that we recognize your service and we thank you for your service. So
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. It's been an absolute honor, and I've worked with really great people on this committee, and it's one of the things I'm going to miss the most because it's obviously something I have a passion for. But I know that people who are in place now will do a great job. But I'm concerned that we will now have 2 vacancies on the audit committee. And I hope that you all will reach out to all of your friends, neighbors, co-workers in the hopes of finding 2 people, because as you all are keenly aware, there's a lot of work ahead, and it's really hard when you just don't have enough folks. So thank you again for everybody's well wishes, and you never know, I might be returning to Annapolis down the road.
So
Thank you,
that
Ms.
there's,
George.
yes, thank you. There's an unwritten rule that you can't leave unless you make a couple of recommendations for replacement. So if you have any, we'd certainly be happy to hear those. So, but again, thank you for your service. I noticed the vitality that you brought to the audit committee, and it's much appreciated. So we have 10 minutes left, and we have quite an unfinished agenda. The big ones, we've certainly talked about the performance measure, and under new business, the strategic plan. The nature of the audit committee, I would say, has been addressed by the fact that we need to, or my view, and I would ask the committee for support on this, we need to go back and look at our enabling legislation. I think we clearly need to add something to it to talk about the strategic plan and its interrelationship with the performance measures. Alderwoman Tierney did a very good job of pointing out ambiguities in the amendment to our charter in 2020. And so I think we really ought to review that in its fullest extent. And to that end, I would like to ask for volunteers to be on a 3-person committee to look at the audit committee enabling legislation and think about additions or refinements. Seeing no hands, I will say that I would like to be on that group. And if anyone wants to join me, it will require legislation. So at least one of the alderpersons has to be on that group. But if everybody else's plate is full, maybe we'll assign that to the 2 vacant members. But I think we need to get on that pretty quickly. I think the audit committee can have a very profound and important impact on some of the missing elements in properly guiding the city. I believed that from the very beginning when I co-sponsored the legislation with Alderman Littman at the time. I will tell you, we did have some fundamental disagreements about where the audit committee was going to go. And I have had some meetings with him in the recent times to talk about it again, and I will go back and solicit some input from him. And Katie, Texas isn't that far away. If you have thoughts on this, we would certainly appreciate hearing those. I'm sure you're going to be busy in your new pursuits, but if you have time, we'd welcome those thinking. So, all right, well, there's a committee of 1. Anybody else that wants to join can join. And so that takes care of that item. Once again, we have not gotten.
Mr. Chair.
Certainly, Alderwoman Pindle Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will you be following up and giving regular reports, monthly reports of our audit committee to our council at the council meetings?
I will, and I recognize that I have not done that to date. I finally feel that I didn't understand how much I did not understand the audit committee. And so I have been struggling to get up to speed. But yes, I was planning to make a report at each of the city council meetings to let people know what we're doing. And I think we have a long list of accomplishments from this meeting and earlier meetings that will make for a good report.
Thank you. Mhm.
All right. The last item on the agenda is risk assessment. I think that is very much been guided by Miss George, and I think another reason why we'll miss her. And we need to have a new patron saint for the risk assessment. And again, I'm looking for hands. I don't see any hands being raised. That is something that I feel totally incompetent to. In fact, I'm still, and Jim, you and I have had conversations.
Yep.
I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around it, but perhaps that's something that you and Caroline could consider.
Alderman Arnett, I will assist you on the enabling legislation amendments.
Okay. Is that to avoid working on the risk assessment?
No, that was just me waiting for an opportunity to speak.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I
yes.
would say, since I will no longer be a member of the audit committee, I would be available to be hired as a consultant to assist with risk assessment. So just keeping that in mind.
Okay. A shameless plug for business.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. All right.
Because when you live in Texas, it's all about business.
Right. Okay. All right. I think we have a lot of unresolved business in terms of risk assessment. So clearly it will need to go on the next agenda. For the next agenda, I think we still need to keep performance measures and discussion of the nature of the audit committee. And I think we need to add follow-up for the strategic plan. So the strategic plan will now become part of old business. And in the normal course of agenda that I'm familiar with, normally you take up old business and then get to new business. And I want to ask the committee and the finance director. I've sit on a lot of committees, and it seems like every one of them asked to have an update from the city manager and the finance director, and that takes up a lot of time. And so I want to ask this committee what you think the cost benefit analysis of taking time from the city finance director to give us a report versus asking the finance director when we think there might be, or asking the city manager for that matter to tell us when there might be appropriate time to be consulting with the finance director. And Jody, I love seeing you, and every time I go to different meetings, we get somewhat of a different flavor to the report. So there is a value added, but I also recognize how hard you're working and that you're shorthanded. So I throw this open as an open question, both to you, the city manager, but the committee as well. Is there value added? Yes, Director Dickinson.
I wouldn't worry about the time aspect. This is something I don't prepare formally. I just go through the things that we're working on here informally. So it doesn't take me any time. I have to be in these meetings anyway. So then it's just a matter of if you think it's useful. I do say a lot of the same things at this meeting, the finance committee and the FAC pretty much get the same mix of what are we working on, you know. It's typically the same list of items. So
I think we do always, the council always needs to strive to be mindful of our eating into staff time. We, I think, benefit from hearing, but we don't want to abuse the time. So I think you've answered my question. We will leave that. And then the last question then would be, do we want to have that in the position that it's in on the agenda? Is that fine to get that kind of an update before we get to me, the old business and new business really are the business of the audit committee. And so are there any feelings on the part of the committee about the order of the agenda or even what's included in the agenda? I saw Mr. Cardillo's hand up first, then Alderwoman Pendle-Charles.
I was going to defer to Alderwoman Charles, but with regards to the next meeting on the calendar, do we have the audit firm prepared to present at the April 18 meeting, or are we deferring them to May?
I don't have an answer to that.
So they can be, if they come to the April meeting, it may be if the single audit is not complete, they will only be presenting the annual financial report and not the single audit of federal grants. So it depends on when that's done. And as of right now, they're in the process of doing some testing. But we're concerned that they'd be able to wrap it up by the end of March. So
Should
I don't know that it'll be ready
on the
by
calendar? Okay, should we put them on the calendar for the May meeting then formally, and so they can be advised as to the time and they can be prepared to present, and we'll be prepared to engage in a dialogue for the May meeting then?
May or April?
I'm getting the sense that we may or may not be, they may or may not be prepared to present a comprehensive listing of their work performed for the April meeting, and that the May meeting may be better.
Is that correct, Director Dickinson?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I'm hoping they'll be done by April, but not sure at this point. So it won't be comprehensive. I can't guarantee a comprehensive presentation.
Yeah, I just don't see a need to bring them in twice is my point.
Right. All right. Thank you for that. And Kim, if we can put a note on the record for the May meeting. We'll be adding a report from the External Audit Committee. Alderwoman Tierney, Pendle Charles.
Thank you,
Gotcha.
Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if it would be helpful, and this is a suggestion, you can take it or throw it in the garbage can. If you and Mrs. Moronsky could possibly get together, since we usually have a robust agenda, to put time limits on each area that we discuss. It might be helpful, but if the committee says no, then that's fine with me.
I actually think that's a good meeting management, but remember, we have older persons on the committee. We don't know time limits. Yes, I think that's
that's why I put it on here.
I think that's a good suggestion. I will get together with Ms. Moransky and we'll try to ballpark some times for that. And it may say, because I think this is quite an aggressive agenda, it's not just the times. I have a feeling when we look at assigning times, we're going to find out we have too much on these agendas for an hour and a half, which we're already overrunning. But thank you for that suggestion. I will do that. Is there anything for the good of the order before we have a motion to adjourn? I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Before we adjourn, thank you again, Ms. George, and thank you everyone else.